Hello and welcome. This is Balance Webster's 12-minute mini session. My name is Stephanie Leigh. Today we're going to be getting down with our downward facing dog. Okay, downward facing dog, also known as Adho Mukha Svanasana. Saying that 8 times fast. I dare you, right? It's a tongue twister. That is the Sanskrit term for what's most popular known as downward facing dog. Some benefits to this pose. Muscle wise, it's going to stretch out the legs, the backside. You'll get your calves stretched out, your hamstrings, your glutes. It's going to strengthen also. This is an all-encompassing posture. It is going to strengthen the arms, your triceps, your shoulders. It's going to strengthen your back body, your lats, which run along the side right here. It's going to strengthen rhomboids between the shoulder blades and all the back body muscles, right? The rector spinae, which run along the side of the spine. It's also going to strengthen out the quads, which are in the front body, as we do tend to use our leg power to straighten our legs in this pose. Some other benefits that downward facing dog offers is it increases blood flow, circulation, which can help with becoming a little bit more focused, increasing like brain activity. It can also help to relieve insomnia, stress, and mild anxiety. Some precautions to downward facing dog. That's something like you just want to be aware of in your body and maybe take a more modified version, which I will show you as an example. So some precautions. If you have any tightness, weakness, or injury to the lower back, the hamstrings, if you have any issues joint-wise with the knees or the wrists like carpal tunnel. Those are some just areas to be aware of. And again, like I mentioned, I'll offer some options that you can use if you have any of those underlying things. That might be a great option for you. Some contraindications, meaning what you should avoid doing this pose. My words are not coming out today. So contraindications, when you want to avoid this pose is if you have any sort of blood pressure issues, whether that be high or low, or any sort of illness, disease, injury to eyes and ears, like vertigo or glaucoma, say. Because this is a slight inversion, therefore all that blood flow is going to come straight into kind of the head, right? So if you have any of those issues, right, blood pressure, eye or ear, injury, disease, underlying issues, you want to avoid this pose as a whole. We'll also offer a different posture, but that can be a nice alternative to the downward facing dog. Okay, so to warm up our body to get in this posture, and I won't do a ton of it right now, I'll more verbalize it. We want to warm up our wrists because we're going to be on our hands a lot for this posture. So if you interlace fingers and then just create some figure 8s with your hands, that gets the synovial fluid in the joint kind of warmed up, which will help to protect it. And make sure that you just reverse direction with that, okay? And then you can do that a few times in each and maybe release and kind of shake it out. Make sure those hands are dead weighted and limp and loose to get that. Some other things you may want to do is just some shoulder circles or arm circles. Again, we're warming up joints, right? Our shoulders are another area of the body that takes and holds a lot of the weight in this pose. So you want to get those kind of moving and grooving as well. Another thing I'll do real briefly, because we're having only 12 minutes. So cat and cow, just to warm up the spine. So getting onto all fours with fingers spread. You'll take a breath in to let your belly melt to the earth, heart and tailbone reaching up. And then on the exhale, rounding of the spine and letting the head fall through nicely. And you can do this just like a handful of times. Again, just kind of warming the body up. Okay, so getting a little bit closer to our downward facing dog pose, what I want us to get into next is another posture that really helps set us up into this downward facing dog, child's pose. So child's pose is taking the knees wide, Big toes touching. We'll sit back to the heels. And now there's a big space between my legs here. So I'm going to use that. I'm going to start walking my hands forward as I fold my torso in between the legs. And I want my arms to be as long as they can here. So walking the hands all the way up. And it may be available to you that your forehead rests onto the earth. It might not. You could also then take either a rolled up blanket or a block, something underneath to ground in. But from here, make sure your fingers are spread out really wide and that your hands are slightly wider than shoulder width distance apart. That's our spacing. To make this active, you want to press your hands into the floor firm, lift the arm bones off the earth, and then draw the shoulder blades down your back, all while keeping the hands positioned as they were. So you're giving a lot of energy here in this space. So this just gets the body already long and the spine long, which will help in our transition into downward facing dog. So this is a nice pose to start in. The next pose I want to show you is a nice pose that can be an alternative. So earlier I mentioned the contraindications of this, something that you should avoid downward facing dog. This is a nice pose that can offer some benefits both of down dog and this child's pose. I like to think of it as a nice in-between posture between the two. It's called puppy pose. So to get into puppy pose from child's pose, I'm just going to lift my sits bones off my heels, and then I'm going to bring my knees in so they're hip bone width distance apart. Then my shins come into parallel with each other. As I do that, then I'm going to have to walk my hands out even further as I lift my hips to the sky. So again, coming in with long arms, forehead resting onto the ground, fingers spread, hands shoulder width apart. My hips, right, soaring to the sky. And then I can let my chest start to melt towards the floor. So for some things here, this is going to give the length in your spine that you're needing in downward facing dog while still staying safely grounded, closer, of course, to the floor. When I let my heart melt to the ground, it gives a nice stretch both in chest and fronts of shoulders, so it's a heart opener. And then with the arms really actively stretched forward, I'm getting a nice stretch into my lats here as well. So again, this is a nice alternative pose, the puppy pose, in case that downward facing dog is a contraindication for you. Alrighty, downward facing dog. Here we go from puppy pose. I'm going to tuck my toes under, right? My feet are hip bone width distance apart here. And I'm going to draw the body forward a bit. I'm going to get a little bit out of my puppy pose. I'm going to walk my hands in just a little bit here just to get started. Now, in your downward facing dog, we're going to start with really deep bends in the knees here. So the reason being, I want my hips to get up as high as they can. So a deep bend in the knees is going to help with that. So I'm starting to lift my hips up. What sometimes I see is that people kind of stop here in terms of the upper body, right? I start to see the shoulders more over the wrists. We want to avoid that, right? Our weight is being placed, a lot of our weight in our hands, and our wrists, right, are fairly dainty compared to a lot of the other parts of our body. So you really have to actively push your chest back towards your thighs. Notice now that my shoulders are drawing further away from my wrists, which will lessen the pressure on them. I'll also offer a modification for wrists later on after we get out of our pose. So here we are, downward facing dog. Now this is a posture that we commonly come to right at the beginning of class. It is usually right after we warm up the body. And it's kind of like a home base for us, right? So we start here, we come back here fairly frequently. So because this is something we do fairly early on in the practice, keeping the knees bent and hips high, start to just pedal the feet out one at a time so that you can just ease into the backs of the legs here, right? Again, stretching calves, hamstrings, and glutes. So taking a moment to pedal, pedal, pedal. And then once you feel like you've gotten a little bit of a stretch going into the backs of the legs, you can then come to a steady downward dog. So depending upon your body, you may still keep a little bend in the knees. Me personally, I bend my knees a bit because I tend to have tight hamstrings. So if I were to completely straighten out my legs, my tailbone starts to tuck under and I lose the length to my spine. So it's not important that the legs lengthen out completely. Sometimes a little bend really helps with the lift, and notice I can press myself back further. Okay, heels, they won't necessarily touch the ground. They may, depending upon your body, but oftentimes they don't, and that's fine. But we don't want them popped high. We do want to anchor them downward towards the floor, right? Rooting heels to the earth gives that extra stretch in the body. So now I'm literally a triangle. My hands, my hips, my feet are all three kind of anchor points, and of course the floor then connecting to make that triangle shape. My head, it should be relaxed. I should be able to shake it yes and no somewhat freely. However, I do not want it to hang completely down, right? Our neck, right, which is also called the cervical spine, is the extension of. So make sure that your neck is in line with your spine. Therefore, your arms should be framing your ears in down dog. And then looking between the two big toes, not forward. We do not want to compress the back of the neck. Okay, so looking through toes, pushing back with hands, chest towards thighs, maybe a little bend in the knees, hips high, heels down, and then take your ribs, seal them inward to activate also your core, your abs. All right, I'm going to come back down to child's pose. This time I'm letting the arms reach behind because, man, I just worked them out holding that position right there, right? So that's our downward facing dog. Really briefly, if you have any wrist issues, you can fold the edge of your mat up, right? And then you could also use a towel or use a towel. It's the heels of your hands. You're pressing onto the towel. Your fingers touch the floor. It lessens the flexion of your wrists, which will ease in that area of your body. So that in a nutshell is Adho Mukha Svanasana, downward facing dog. Just a way to break it down, become a little bit more familiar with it, know your options, and to really just be able to practice a little bit more safely. So thank you guys very much for tuning in to this 12-minute mini session. Check out all the rest on the YouTube channel, Balanced Webster. I'll see you guys soon. Have a great day.